Water quality in the UK has been ranked among the worst in Europe for years, while rivers and lakes in places like Austria, Greece and Malta are among the very best. So what is the UK doing wrong? Hello and welcome to Roundtable. I'm Enda Brady. It's great to have your company. Now, late last month, the UK said it would remove some EU rules meant to curb water pollution. It would make it easier for property developers to build more homes. But campaigners fear it will make the country's already polluted rivers even worse. So how can the UK clean up its act?
It's discharges like these that have made the UK the sick person of Europe when it comes to water quality. Activists say the country's rivers and seas are becoming increasingly polluted by sewage, the result of ageing infrastructure, and it's having an impact on people's health. This campaigner for Surfers Against Sewage, an environmental group, says her son fell ill after a discharge on a beach.
Whilst we were on the beach, for a few hours, there was a discharge, and then the next day he got a gastric problem.
According to data compiled by the New Statesman, the proportion of bathing waters in the UK rated excellent by environmental agencies was among the lowest in Europe in 2021. And a UK House of Commons report last year said only 14% of the country's rivers had a good ecological status rating. Part of the problem lies in a sewage system that's not fit for purpose in the 21st century. The Thames Tideway project is one attempt to address that. The new 25-kilometre sewer will help to drastically reduce the amount of waste reaching London's main river. But others point to an even more serious issue. According to figures compiled by the Financial Times, the UK's privatised water companies paid nearly $1.8 billion in dividends to shareholders last year. That's about a threefold increase from 2021. Maintaining dividends means less money is available for investment in critical infrastructure, such as sewage treatment and water mains. So, how can the UK clean up its rivers?
Well, let's meet our guests. Joining us is Taylor Gill, who's a spokesperson for the Tideway scheme, the new so-called super sewer in London. He joins us from West Sussex. From West Dorset in the UK is Julia Hales, environmental campaigner and co-founder of the think tank Sustainability. And here in the studio with me is Liana Hosea, founder and journalist at Watershed Investigations, which is an investigative journalism site. Hello to you all, and thanks for your time. First of all, Julia, to you, why is this happening in the UK? Or more to the point, perhaps, why is this being allowed to happen in the United Kingdom?
Well, I think the trouble is it's difficult to ascribe it to any one thing, but I think that probably I'd lay the biggest blame at the government, because I think this simply is not a priority for them. And that applies to wider environmental issues. And I think by the very fact that they put Therese Coffey in charge of the environment, it's pretty symbolic that they don't care much about it because she's clueless.
It's pretty scathing criticism there. I mean, is the government to blame, do you think, for allowing these water companies to make such incredible profits at a time of really extraordinary pollution as well?
Well, I think the government are not setting ambitious targets, and they're not enforcing the targets that they're making. And as we've seen in the last week or so, the BBC identifying that the water companies not only pouring sewage out in the times when they're permitted to do so, but they're actually pouring sewage out at times when they're not permitted to do so. Is a blatant disregard to whatever regulation is there, and I think it's therefore not enforced properly. There's not enough priority being given to it, and there's so much more that needs to be done, and I don't think the Environment Agency is doing enough either.
Liana, the statistics are quite damning here in the United Kingdom. 825 sewage spills per day last year. That's 1.7 million hours throughout the whole of last year. I mean, this is appalling, isn't it?
Yes, well, all of England's rivers fail to meet their health status, and that's their only 14% of England's rivers meet their ecological health status, and that's because of, number one is farming pollution, and the second reason is sewage. And then they all fail in England, all of the rivers fail on their chemical health status. And a lot of that is because of so-called forever chemicals called PFAS. And so, yes, the rivers, which are really the lifeblood of this country, are being, treated like an open sewer.
Has it always been this bad, or is it just getting worse year on year?
Well, I mean, I think the situation has been really bad for a long time, but what's happening now is our awareness is growing of the situation. I mean, water companies are actually allowed to dump untreated sewage in certain circumstances when the system is overwhelmed, for example, so during very heavy rain. But they have been shown to be illegally dumping sewage a number of times, even as far back as 2012. The European Court of Justice sort of fined UK, saying that, well, they wanted to fine the UK and said that, they had broken their own rules on illegal sewage dumping. So what the figures that came out recently about the dry spills, 3,500 hours of spilling during dry hours, that might be a sign that it's illegal.
Julia, you hinted about the lack of leadership on this. What does it say about the United Kingdom that one of the most prominent spokespeople is a musician, an artist, a singer, Fergal Sharkey? Let's have a listen to a clip he recorded. This is a video message Fergal Sharkey recently sent to the UK's Environment Secretary, Therese Coffey.
Secretary of State, 12 years ago, 25% of our rivers were in good ecological status. That's now 14. Your own data tells me that's going to be 6 by 2027. Why and how did you ever allow that to happen?
Julia, I'd love to know what Therese Coffey thinks of all this and what action she has planned, perhaps. We did invite her on the show repeatedly and we never heard from her. Look, what do you make of the effort people like Fergal Sharkey are going to?
Well, I think that it's quite positive that the public and prominent people are actually making a fuss about this, because it quite clearly is something that needs public attention to focus on it. However, I do also think that we tend to focus on the impacts on public health, which is extremely important. One of my sons was severely poisoned by swimming in the River Avon. But I think that we also have to remember that there's a very, very significant impact on wildlife in the rivers as well. And this is extremely detrimental. We've had an 83% decrease in freshwater species since the 1970s. It is just completely unacceptable that we should be going on doing that, and yet the water companies should be operating as if all was okay and distributing profits to their shareholders. It simply doesn't make sense not to do their job properly and to get significantly well paid for what they're doing.
Julia, just if you will, tell us what happened to your son.
So my son went swimming with 3 or 4 others in the River Avon, and a year or so ago, and he got very badly poisoned. He was violently sick for at least a day. And I rang the Environment Agency, and they say their remit, it says, is we work to create better places for people and wildlife and support sustainable development. Well, the first comment they had is, we're not sure that this is something that we should be following up on, which I thought was pretty despicable. The next thing that they said was that actually it's not really safe to swim in any rivers in the UK at all. And yet he was swimming in a popular swimming spot. There's certainly no notices to say that that's not possible. And they then said, well, actually, rather than asking us, you should really be calling the doctor to find out what was really poisoning them. You know, a whole lot of sort of shifting the blame, not working it out. When I pushed, as you can imagine I might, they did investigate. They found that actually there was a sewage outfall exactly where my son was swimming. And they said, oh, it'll only release sewage on a rainy day. It was a sunny day. It had been sunny for several days beforehand. Quite clearly, they had been breaching their limits. And, it's just totally unacceptable to have that happen as a standard in popular swimming spots, and that we should be accepting what the government are doing. And then we look at the targets that they're setting. and they are, ridiculous and clearly have not made it a priority, always with the excuse that it's going to cost too much money and too difficult, it's overwhelming the infrastructure. But at the very least, we need to know that they are making it a priority and doing as much as they can. And I simply don't have the confidence in that.
Leanna, what are the health risks to the public of bathing in areas where the water quality is really, really poor as a result of sewage and everything else being discharged?
Yeah, I think what happened to Julia's son, and what we're hearing from Julia is really this huge level of public anger about the problem of sewage in the rivers, and because it's been going on for so long, as Julia said, a lot of people think that the government may be asleep at the wheel or they've been too lenient, and and the regulators have not been doing their job properly. Environment Agency whistleblowers actually told me kind of off the record that they don't have enough enforcement officers to go and investigate pollution incidents either, because their funding has been cut. So you get situations where there's dumping in the river, and that dangerous bacteria is in sewage, can be in sewage, such as E. coli, as well as norovirus. So I did an investigation with Watershed where we got samples of oysters and shellfish from all around the country, and found extremely high E. coli levels in some of them. And this is really damaging to their business as well. So I was down in Cornwall where 11 shellfish areas were closed because of too high E. coli levels. So they can't sell any of their oysters. They're out of pocket, they're out of business, and they too are really angry with the government for not getting this under control. Now, what the government says is that, Ofwat and the financial regulator and the Environment Agency say they've got 6 cases which are open now. They're taking this very seriously. It's the biggest investigation that they've ever undertaken. Of course, recently there were other environmental rules to protect our rivers were sort of ripped up. So a lot of people are sceptical that the government is taking this seriously enough.
How bad does it look for the UK that there was a recent event in Sunderland, in the northeast of England, the World Triathlon Series Championship? 57 competitors ended up violently ill off the back of swimming off the coast of Sunderland. How bad does this look that people come to this country from all over the world to swim and take part in a triathlon, and they end up with stomach cramps and diarrhoea because the water quality is so terrible?
Well, I think it looks really bad and really embarrassing. The UK should have better environmental protection laws, and they should actually enforce those laws. I mean, the government targets at the moment to end discharges into the river are 2050. So that's quite some way down the line. And for rivers to be in a good health status is 2063. So, and that was delayed. It was meant to be 2027. Now it's 2063. Are people going to feel safe? And, recently we also found out, and we kind of broke the story about, the Water Framework Directive statistics that used to come out annually, then they were every 3 years, and now they're going to be every 6 years. Now, they're well within the law to do that, but at a time when people want to know the health of their river, whether they, should go in and swim in it, it's not going to give them the information to empower them to make that decision.
Well, while swimming still remains popular across the United Kingdom, albeit a risky pastime, let's hear from Susan Moat, who swims regularly. This is what she had to say on the whole issue.
It's our birthright to be able to go to the nearest river or sea or lake and be able to swim in it and feel safe. It's such a beautiful thing to do. It's our heritage. I think it's a great shame that the water companies are not taking our waterways, treating our waterways with respect. They're not treating them with respect, and they're pumping sewage into them, meanwhile paying the shareholders, as I understand it, big profits, but not investing in the infrastructure of the sewerage system so that we have clean water.
Well, there is some good news, certainly in London for the River Thames. The Tideway project will be switched on next year. Taylor Gill, you're heavily involved in that. Just talk us through the level of investment and the difference it's going to make.
Sure. So the problem in London is that it relies on a Victorian system. It was built 150 years ago for a population of 4 million. And the system now has to cope with a population of 9 million people. And much more of the kind of soakable areas have been paved over. And as a result, almost every time it rains, that rain fills the existing system. And rather than having it back up into streets and homes, it's discharged into the Thames. So in an average year, this happens around 50 times, around 40 million tonnes of storm sewage. So the Tideway project is aiming to intercept the most influential spill points in central London. And we will reduce sewage overflows into the central London Thames by 95% once we're fully operational in 2025. But like you say, next year we will be turning the system on. So all the kind of civil engineering is done, the heavy infrastructure is built. And so the next phase for us is really testing that everything works and looking ahead to a healthier River Thames in central London.
And this is an investment of £4.5 billion sterling. It's taken 8 years. So really, year on year, Londoners at least will start to see some improvement?
Quite quickly, we anticipate there'll be an improvement. The River Thames will always look the way it does. It's a kind of silty river. The look of it won't change much, but it will certainly smell much nicer. It will certainly be a much healthier environment for London's wildlife. And of course, we will not only intercept the sewage, but all the sewage-derived litter that currently spills into the Thames as well. So, yeah, like you say, it's a £4.5 billion project. It's being paid for through a levy on Thames Water customers' bills. We anticipated at the beginning of the project that this would be £20 to £25 per year. And currently, despite a number of engineering challenges, COVID, and other things, we're below that range. So it's 4.5 billion is a big number, but spread over millions of customers, we think it's value for money.
Julia, I want to ask you about a recent announcement by a very senior Conservative politician in the UK called Michael Gove, where he announced he would be ripping up environmental protections for rivers so that more houses can be built in parts of the United Kingdom. What's your take on that, and what's it going to do to water quality across Britain?
Well, I think it's a really good example of why the government, of how the government is not looking holistically at any of the issues, house building, water quality, whatever it may be, because to simply just get rid of all the environmental protections that are needed for new housing development is such a narrow focus in terms of way of looking at it. Clearly, I mean, I think that there's also sort of pointing to the fact that agricultural pollution is sort of bigger than house building. So they almost are sort of saying, well, let's have a look at that and forget about the house building side. But they're continuing to build on floodplains. They're not looking at that as an important consideration when they're building new houses, whether there are systems in place that can actually cope with the new developments that are putting in place. Just basically shelving it. I mean, when you look at what the previous speaker said about the timescales, I mean, many of these politicians will be dead by then. So effectively, they don't really care. They're just pushing it into the long grass and focusing on some short-term aims and not looking, as they should be, as a responsible government should be, in a holistic way at working out the whole size of the problem and how they can focus at making sure that we have clean rivers that are not terrible for people to swim in and damaging to our own health, and also possibly even more importantly are not so damaging to wildlife, because we need to have this biodiversity and it's being totally ignored in terms of what governments are doing.
Well, we asked some representatives of the UK's biggest water companies to come on the show today and discuss these very issues. They all politely declined. Wessex Water directed us to a recent statement they made in response to a BBC investigation into sewage discharges. And this is what they said. Wessex Water said, "We're using nature-based solutions to treat groundwater-affected sites. And by 2025, we will have completed or progressed 28 schemes in our region. Meanwhile, we're investing £3 million a month on reducing overflows, which we agree aren't fit for the 21st century. And we're planning to invest significantly more between 2025 and 2030, subject to regulatory approval." Leanna, if you wanted to be hypercritical, all these water companies seem to have no end of cash when it comes to paying shareholder dividends, and yet they plead the poor mouth when it comes to investing in infrastructure. Is that a fair criticism?
Well, since the water companies were privatised in the 80s, I think they've collectively paid out over £70 billion in dividends to shareholders. Water companies have also borrowed a lot of money. So off what the financial regulator said from the figures early last year was that they are £60.6 billion in debt. So, you know, they've got lots of debt. They've paid out a lot of money in dividends. And, you know, people are saying, well, you should have invested more in the infrastructure because, as the Tideway representative said, you know, its bills are going to be rising. So I'm going to be one of those people, you know, my bills are going to be going up and I'm going to be paying for that. But a lot of public feeling is that, well, companies should be paying more. So, I mean, there was a YouGov poll which said that the majority of the population think that water companies should be renationalised. That's including Conservative Party voters as well. So at the moment, the water companies are rather unpopular.
Some of these water companies are drowning in debt themselves, yet they still have huge bonuses for fat cat chief executives. I mean, this is an industry that really is in a mess, isn't it?
Well, Thames Water, for example, almost faced collapse in June this year. There was talk that the government might have to put them under some sort of part public ownership. They did get an injection of private financing. And then when they were privatised in 1989, they were kind of free of debt at the time. But they've, you know, one of its owners, Macquarie, an Australian kind of investment infrastructure bank, you know, borrowed a lot of money and you know, it was about 10 billion in debt when they left. So yes, they are saddled with a huge amount of debt, and there's a big bill which is going to come to you know, to the public probably, because, you know, when you go to update a Victorian infrastructure, it's going to cost a lot. I mean, critics would say, well, you know, it's been over 30 years since privatisation. You know, why do we still have such a Victorian infrastructure? So yes, a lot of criticism and public anger around that.
Julia, can I ask you, is there a culture of greed at these water companies? Take, and put very little back into infrastructure?
Well, it does appear so. I mean, obviously, you know, we have to look at that record. Why haven't they invested in the infrastructure? Why has it come as a surprise? Because they're in the, you know, they're working with these systems. They must have known this all those years ago. And if they'd been putting the right amount of money into the system all the way along, we would not be facing this crisis now. And of course, it's going to be exacerbated because we're feeling the impacts of climate change, where we have more rain, you know, different climate challenges, more flooding, etc. So, you know, they're effectively firefighting from a position that they should not be in the first place. And I think I also just have to say there are a number of organisations that have really been trying their best to tackle these issues and raising public awareness and doing things. So, for example, the Rivers Trust have been doing an awful lot. You can check river quality through using their website. Surfers Against Sewage is a fantastic organisation which has obviously been around actually for at least 35 years. And then there's a Good Law Project, which are trying to take a legal challenge about it. So there are lots of organisations trying to do things, but it's quite clear that neither the government nor the water companies nor the Environment Agency are playing their part and making this a sufficient priority that it should be.
Julia, do you think this is something Rishi Sunak cares about in any way ahead of an election next year?
Well, I think sadly not. I mean, I'm afraid that, you know, he may have his qualities, but environmental issues do appear to be very high on his agenda.
Leanna, name a river in the United Kingdom where you would be happy to take me swimming safely and healthily.
Oh, I thought you were going to say, name a river under threat. And I was going to tell you about the River Avon, which is, you know, a beautiful chalk stream, because chalk streams are very rare in the world. There's only about 200 of them, and most of them are here in England. And they're quite special because they have these really deep aquifers, so the water's really known for being very pure, and you know, it really helps with you know, they're hubs of biodiversity, otters, salmon, kingfishers, that's the kind of place where they can thrive. But so many chalk streams are, you know, and rivers in even protected areas are really under threat. They're in not a good health condition and they're over-abstracted. So, you know, where would I go wild swimming? I'm really not sure that I would.
That's quite a damning indictment, isn't it? I mean, people will be watching this all over the world and there's nowhere safe to go swimming in an English river.
Well, they're in the sea, in the, you know, in blue flag seas. You jump in there, Julia.
Well, I went swimming this morning on the Jurassic Coast and I looked up on the River Trust website to check, and it does have a nice green flag saying it's okay. And it's a really beautiful coastline. But the trouble is, it is a bit hit and miss. You know, Russian roulette, you don't know that that's going to continue. And it should be very different.
Julia, Leanna and Taylor, thank you so much for your time and your insight. Remember, you can see more discussion and debate on our YouTube channel. Search for Roundtable TRT World. But for now, from me and Brady and all the team here, goodbye and thank you for watching.